I don't know how old you are, but I am old enough to remember the excitement of a piece of software called Internet Explorer. At first, it was quite difficult to get hold of it. You had to get a CD. Remember a CD with the software on? Then you could install it into your PC. Then you could surf on a brand new thing called the World Wide Web. And then Internet Explorer started to come on every single computer you ever used, whether you wanted it or not. And frankly, it was never just as cool as Netscape or Google Chrome. Well, Microsoft say they're going to start shutting it down and won't provide support for it in the future. Arthur Goldstuck is the CEO of World Wide Works. Arthur, good afternoon to you. Am I wrong to say that Internet Explorer was never really as cool as Netscape, which was first, or Google Chrome, which came after?
Good afternoon, Stephen. It was a very brief period from about December 1995 to February 1996 when Internet Explorer was pretty cool. But the reason it was cool was because it was free at a time when Netscape Navigator, the original mass use browser, you might say, decided to start charging internet service providers to include it in those CDs or even stiffy disks, they used to call them, that were referred to as starter kits. You had to have an internet starter kit in order to get your computer to connect. And initially, all the service providers were able to provide starter kits for free because Netscape Navigator was free. And then Netscape decided that because Microsoft was so uncool and just didn't get it with browsers, they would start charging. And that is at exactly the moment that Internet Explorer 2.0 came out. And it was a fairly decent browser. And very shortly thereafter, Internet Explorer 3.0, which is actually a great browser for free. And the entire world of Internet service providers migrated from Netscape to Internet Explorer. So for that brief moment, because it was free, and it was quite decent, it was cool.
It's really quite bizarre to go back and think to get on the internet you had to start with a CD. I mean, if I had to tell people I work with now, they'll just laugh at me.
It was bizarre, and also the fact that you had to have various pieces of software in order for the browser to speak to the internet via your computer. So it wasn't just the browser, and those starter kits were essential. But it was so complex that if you simply got onto the internet, you were regarded as quite techy.
And then, of course, I think at one point it seemed impossible to escape this browser. It was in literally every single PC, and that was because of what Microsoft were doing.
Well, in the first place, Netscape gave up the browser market to Microsoft, but then Microsoft abused that dominance and forced people to have to use Explorer if they were using a Windows computer. And that was at a time when Windows dominated all computing. Mac and the Macintosh operating system was still a very small niche that mostly people in education and publishing were using. So it didn't even feature, and it wasn't regarded as competition in any way. But then antitrust authorities came down on Microsoft in a big way because of it being so embedded in the operating system and because it was so anti-competitive in terms of the choice that the consumer had. It actually was enormously damaging to Microsoft in the medium term.
And Microsoft basically just pushed too hard, didn't they? I mean, that was their mistake.
That was that was probably most of their mistake, but also the fact that they weren't following where the consumer or the user of the internet was going. And the user wanted a more simplified, streamlined experience. And that's when Google came along with Chrome in around 2008. The market was just waiting for it. There were alternatives like Firefox, for example, and Firefox, you could say, was the previous generation's version of Chrome. But people going from Explorer to Firefox were also seen as kind of cutting edge. But when Chrome came along, and especially once Android made Google operating systems more widely accepted, then Chrome almost overnight became what Internet Explorer was in the late 90s. It began to dominate the market, and today most people use Chrome, and most sites or services that require a specific browser will require Chrome rather than Internet Explorer, unless you use SARS, for example, and you're still stuck in the 20th century.
You got that elbow in there very, very carefully. What is it about Google Chrome that makes it so special then?
It was based on an open standard that anyone could apply. whereas the approach that Internet Explorer, or Microsoft in particular, took was to try and make it as proprietary as possible, lock people in and lock them down in terms of having to build software specifically for the browser or applications before we had apps. What Chrome did was made it so open that anyone could develop for them, but in such a way that the applications would be compatible with other browsers as well. So that compatibility, along with it being quite lightweight, they tried to strip it down to the bare essentials. So you didn't need to download a heavy chunk of software that slowed down your computer and which in turn slowed down your browser as well. And that made browsing a lot more streamlined, but also a lot quicker.
So Internet Explorer will sort of go into the sort of depths of time. There is, of course, Edge, which I presume takes over for Microsoft. How does it compare?
Edge uses the same basic fabric as Chrome. So it uses a system called Chromium, which is the underlying code that allows the browser to interact with all other software and all other computers. And by going the Chromium route, Microsoft is in effect saying that Google was correct all the time. Google originally developed Chromium, but made it open source for anyone to use. And Microsoft is also now embracing that approach so that it is part of an open standards environment. Regardless of what site you go to, whether you use Edge or Chrome, you'll have a similar experience, but not Internet Explorer.
One of the things that's really interesting around the way you've described the history of Internet Explorer is that for a time it played an important role. Is it still possible for one piece of sort of browsing software to play that important a role, or is the sort of Internet just too big now?
You could argue that Chrome is playing that role today. There was a brief time when we thought Firefox would take over. It started becoming more and more popular, but it also got stuck in its own standards, dead ends, you might call it. There were various cul-de-sacs that went down from a functionality point of view, and Chrome opened all of that up again. So Chrome today is regarded as the standard. And if you, for example, are going to be joining a teleconference via a Zoom or a video conference, you're usually advised to open it through Chrome because they know that there won't be compatibility issues. Whereas with almost any other browser, there are going to be compatibility issues with various video conferencing pieces of software. That's obviously why Microsoft wants to bring Edge back into that world. They've obviously lost the edge. Excuse the pun.
Arthur Goldstuck, thank you very much indeed. Do appreciate the time from Worldwide Works. It's amazing how important sort of recent computer history is, or recent internet history is, to all of us now.